In the lawless waters of the Caribbean, Captain Jonah Blackwell is a man feared by all, a ghost driven by vengeance and a past that refuses to die. Clara Westbrook is a survivor, fighting to protect her sickly brother from a world that wants to crush them. When a brutal raid forces them together on the infamous Black Widow, a dangerous bargain is struck: her freedom for his redemption. But as a rival pirate threatens to destroy them, the line between captive and keeper blurs, igniting a passion that could burn down the seas. Dive into a sweeping tale of danger, sacrifice, and a love that defies the tides. The tavern smelled of stale ale, unwashed bodies, and the distinct briny rot of the harbor at low tide. Clara Westbrook wiped the rough-hewn counter with a rag that was arguably dirtier than the wood itself, her eyes darting toward the heavy oak door leading to the back storeroom. "More ale, girl, and try to look less like a funeral mourner," a patron bellowed, slamming his tankard down. Clara forced a tight, hollow smile. "Coming, sir." Her hands trembled as she filled the tankard. It was a humid night in Port Royal, the air thick enough to choke on, but Clara felt a cold chill in her bones. Owen had been coughing again. The deep, rattling sound that shook his small, 8-year-old frame had been audible through the thin walls earlier, and she had prayed the noise wouldn't carry over the din of the drunkards. She moved through the crowd, dodging grasping hands and leering gazes. She was 22, with hair the color of spun walnut and eyes that held too much shadow for her age. She had learned to make herself small, to blend into the grime of the rusty anchor, but tonight, invisibility felt impossible. Lieutenant Moore was sitting in the corner. The naval officer's pristine blue coat was an insult to the filth around him. He wasn't drinking. He was watching her. Clara dropped the tankard at the patron's table and hurried back behind the bar, her heart hammering against her ribs. Moore had been asking questions about stray orphans and the health of the populace. If he found Owen, if he saw how sick the boy was, he would take him. The workhouses were a death sentence for the healthy, let alone the frail. A sudden crash of glass shattered the uneasy rhythm of the room. The front doors didn't just open. They exploded inward, splintering off their hinges. The tavern went silent for a heartbeat, then erupted into chaos. "Pirates!" someone screamed. Men in ragged clothes, armed with cutlasses and flintlocks, poured into the room like a dark tide. They weren't the disorganized ruffians of the local gangs. These men moved with military precision. They overturned tables, not looking for coin purses, but for supplies: kegs, sacks of flour, dried meats. Clara didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She turned and ran for the back door. "Owen!" She burst into the storeroom. It was dark, smelling of sawdust and rats. Owen was curled up on a pile of grain sacks, his eyes wide and fever-bright in the gloom. "Clara?" He wheezed, sitting up. "Shh," she hissed, rushing to him and scooping his thin body into her arms. He was too heavy for her to carry far, but adrenaline lent her a desperate strength. "We have to hide, now." "Well, well," a gravelly voice rasped from the doorway. "What have we here? A little mouse and her pup." Clara spun around, placing herself between Owen and the intruder. The pirate was huge, his face obscured by a matted beard, a rusted cutlass in his hand. He grinned, revealing blackened teeth. "Back away," Clara warned, her voice shaking but loud. She grabbed a heavy iron ladle from a barrel of brine. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was all she had. "Feisty," the man laughed, stepping closer. The stench of rum and old blood wafted off him. "Captain likes feisty, or maybe I'll keep you for myself." He lunged. Clara swung the ladle, connecting with his shoulder, but it merely bounced off his leather coat. He backhanded her, a heavy blow that sent her sprawling across the floor. "Clara!" Owen screamed, scrambling toward her. The pirate grabbed Owen by the back of his tunic, lifting him like a sack of flour. The boy kicked and flailed, coughing violently. "Let him go!" Clara shrieked, scrambling to her feet. blood tasting of copper in her mouth. "Take me! Leave him be!" "I'll take both," the pirate sneered, raising his cutlass to silence the boy's crying. "Scrags!" The single word cut through the noise of the raid like a whip crack. It was spoken softly, yet it carried an authority that froze the room. The large pirate Scraggs stiffened and lowered his weapon, though he didn't drop Owen. He turned toward the open door leading to the tavern main floor. A man stood there, framed by the smoke and flickering lantern light. He was tall, dressed in a long black coat that had seen better days, but was tailored to fit broad shoulders. His hair was dark, tied back, revealing a face of sharp angles and a jaw set like granite. But it was his eyes, cold, intelligent, and utterly devoid of mercy, that made the air leave the room. Captain Jonah Blackwell, the demon of the Caribbean. "Captain," Scraggs stammered, "found him hiding, thought they might be useful." Jonah Blackwell stepped into the small room. The space suddenly felt suffocatingly small. He looked at Clara, who was trembling, blood trickling from her lip, her hands balled into fists. Then his gaze shifted to Owen, who was dangling from Scraggs' grip, his face pale and gasping for air. Jonah's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Put the boy down," Jonah said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "Just a runt, Cap'n. Probably sick. I can dispose." "I said," Jonah stepped closer, the steel of his pistol glinting at his belt, "put him down, or I will remove the arm that holds him." Scraggs dropped Owen immediately. The boy collapsed, coughing hard, and Clara threw herself over him, shielding his body with hers. She looked up at the captain, her eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and defiance. "Don't touch him," she hissed, like a cornered cat. Jonah stared down at her. For a second, something flickered behind his cold mask, but ghost of an emotion, there and gone too fast to name. He looked at the squalor of the room, the bruise forming on her cheek, and the sickly rattle of the boy's chest. "The Navy is torching the docks," Jonah said, his tone flat. "Lieutenant Moore has ordered the port burned to flush us out. If you stay here, you burn with it." Clara blinked, the reality of his words sinking in. She could smell the smoke now, acrid and heavy. "Get up," Jonah commanded. "Where?" Clara whispered. "My ship." "I won't be your slave," she spat, clutching Owen tighter. Jonah's lip curled slightly, not in a smile, but in something resembling disdain. "I have no need for slaves, girl, but I am offering you life. Choose, now." Outside, a cannon blast shook the foundation of the tavern. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Clara looked at Owen. He was terrified, barely breathing. If they stayed, the fire or the Navy would kill them. If they went, she stood up, pulling Owen with her. "If you hurt him," she said, her voice trembling, "I will kill you." Jonah turned on his heel, his coat swirling around him. "Try to keep up." The journey to the ship was a blur of smoke and shouting. The town was indeed burning. Orange flames licked at the night sky, casting hellish shadows across the water. Clara kept her head down, gripping Owen's hands so tight her knuckles turned white. They were shoved into a longboat with crates of stolen supplies. The sailors ignored her, their eyes fixed on the horizon, where the silhouette of a massive ship loomed, the Black Widow. Clara had heard the stories. They said Blackwell had no heart, that he had cut it out and cast it into the sea to stop the pain of a past life. They said his ship was crewed by ghosts. Sitting in the damp wood of the longboat, clutching her shivering brother. Clara felt she was crossing the river Styx. "Easy, lass," a voice said beside her. She flinched. The man rowing next to her was older, with a graying beard and kind eyes that seemed out of place among the cutthroats. "Name's Jem," he said quietly, pulling the oar with rhythmic strength. "Captain's bark is worse than his bite." "Usually." Clara didn't answer. She pulled her shawl tighter around Owen. Is he going to sell us?" she whispered, the fear finally voicing itself. Jem glanced at the captain, who stood at the bow of the longboat, staring stoically at his ship. Jonah Blackwell doesn't deal in flesh. Whatever reason he took you, it wasn't for coin. That wasn't entirely comforting. If not for coin, then for what? They reached the Black Widow. The ascent up the rope ladder was a nightmare. Clara had to tie Owen to her back with her shawl, climbing hand over hand while the dark ocean churned below, hungry and deep. When her boots hit the deck, she was breathless. The ship was alive with activity. Men hauling lines, unfurling sails, preparing for departure. "Calloway," Jonah's voice boomed. Jem stepped forward. "Aye, Captain. Get us underway. Northwest course. We lose the fires before the wind turns." Jonah then turned his gaze to Clara. "You, follow me." He didn't wait to see if she obeyed. He strode toward the stern, up the short steps to the quarterdeck, and toward the heavy double doors of the captain's cabin. Clara hesitated. The crew was watching her now. She could feel their eyes. Hungry, curious, cruel. She realized with a jolt that the safest place on this ship might be with the monster who commanded it. She grabbed Owen's hand and ran after Jonah. The cabin was not what she expected. She had imagined a dungeon or a room filled with stolen gold and weapons. Instead, the captain's quarters smelled of beeswax, old paper, and sandalwood. A wall of windows at the back looked out over the receding, burning harbor. There was a large desk covered in maps, a heavy table, and books, shelves of them bolted to the walls. Jonah closed the door behind them, shutting out the noise of the crew. The silence was sudden and heavy. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a velvet settee bolted to the floor near the windows. Clara sat, pulling Owen onto her lap. The boy was lethargic, his forehead burning hot against her neck. Jonah walked to a cabinet, poured an amber liquid into a glass, and downed it in one swallow. He turned to face them, leaning against his desk, crossing his arms. The lantern light cast deep shadows across his face, highlighting a thin, pale scar running from his temple into his hairline. "You will stay here," Jonah said. "Here?" Clara asked, her voice small. "In your room?" "The crew has been at sea for 3 months without shore leave," Jonah said bluntly. "They are not kind men. If I put you in the brig, you will rot. If I leave you on deck, you will be prey. Here, you are property of the captain. No one will touch you." Clara felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. "Property?" "A necessary lie," Jonah said, his eyes narrowing. "Unless you prefer scrags?" Clara swallowed hard. "No." "Good." He pushed off the desk. "There is a blanket in the chest. Food will be brought when we are clear of the blockade." He moved toward the door. "Where are you going?" Clara asked, panic rising again. "To sail my ship," he said. "Lock the door behind me. Open it for no one but Mr. Calloway or myself." "Wait," she pleaded. "My brother, he needs water. He's burning up." Jonah paused, his hand on the brass latch. He looked at Owen, really looked at him, for the second time that night. The harsh lines of his face softened, just a fraction. "I will send water," he said. Then he left, the lock clicking heavily from the outside. The first night was an eternity. The ship groaned and swayed, a living beast fighting the waves. Owen tossed and turned, his breathing ragged. Clara sat on the floor beside the settee, dipping a rag into the basin of water a young cabin boy had nervously delivered an hour ago, dabbing Owen's forehead. "Mama," Owen whimpered in his sleep. "I'm here, Owen. It's Clara. I'm here," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. She was exhausted, her body aching from the blow Scraggs had dealt her. But she couldn't sleep. She was trapped in a pirate captain's bedroom, miles from land, with no hope of rescue. Sometime deep in the night, the lock clicked. Clara scrambled back, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from the table, holding it like a club. Jonah entered. He looked weary, his coat discarded, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms marked by the sea and violence. He stopped when he saw her, the candlestick raised. He didn't laugh. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging her defense. "Put it down," he said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt you." He walked past her to the desk, opening a drawer. He pulled out a small leather pouch and a glass vial. "The boy," Jonah said, kneeling beside the settee. "What are you doing?" Clara moved between him and Owen. Jonah looked up at her. His eyes were tired. "The boy has the lung rot. I can hear it from the helm. If the fever doesn't break, he won't last the week." Clara's breath hitched. "Are you a doctor?" "A man who's seen enough death to recognize it," he replied. He uncorked the vial. The smell of eucalyptus and peppermint filled the air. "It's a tincture. It will help him breathe." Clara hesitated, then slowly lowered the candlestick. She moved aside. Jonah lifted Owen's head with surprising gentleness. "Drink, lad," he murmured. His voice, usually a growl, was pitched low, soothing. Owen coughed, then swallowed the liquid. Jonah rubbed the boy's back, a circular, practiced motion that seemed to calm Owen's tremors. Clara watched, stunned. This was the butcher? The demon? He handled her brother with the care one might give a piece of fragile porcelain. "He needs to sleep upright," Jonah said, standing up and wiping his hands on a rag. He grabbed several pillows from his bunk, a large, opulent bed in the corner that Clara had studiously avoided looking at, and propped Owen up. "Thank you," Clara whispered. It felt strange to thank her captor. Jonah didn't acknowledge it. He walked to the other side of the room, grabbed a woolen blanket, and threw it onto the floor near the door. "Take the bed," he said, gesturing to his bunk. "The boy needs the comfort." Clara stammered. "Where will you sleep?" "I don't sleep much," Jonah muttered, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, stretching his long legs out. He closed his eyes, crossing his arms over his chest. "Light the lamp if he worsens. Otherwise, be silent." Clara stood there for a long moment, watching him. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve. A ruthless pirate who saved children. A captain who slept on the floor of his own cabin to give a prisoner his bed. She carefully moved Owen to the large bed, tucking him in. Then she sat in the chair beside it, watching the rise and fall of her brother's chest, which already seemed easier. She looked back at Jonah. His breathing had deepened. He was asleep, or pretending to be. Days bled into one another. The routine of the ship became a strange, terrifying rhythm. Clara and Owen remained in the cabin. Meals were brought by Jem, who offered brief, polite conversation. Jonah came and went, mostly to check charts or retrieve instruments, treating Clara with a distant, cold professionalism. But the tension was building. Clara could feel it. On the fourth morning, Clara couldn't take the idleness anymore. She found a needle and thread in one of the desk drawers and began mending the torn curtains of the cabin windows. When Jonah entered and saw her working, he paused. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I need to be useful," Clara replied, not looking up. "I won't be a leech." Jonah grunted and moved to his desk. "Captain," Clara said, biting the thread. "The crew, they talk. Sailors always talk. They think that I'm yours." Jonah stopped shuffling his papers. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You are safe because they think that. Would you prefer I tell them the truth? That you are a stowaway with no value to the ship? I am not a stowaway. You kidnapped us. I saved you." Jonah's voice rose, startling her. He stood up, towering over the desk. "Do you think I wanted a nursemaid on my ship? Do you think I wanted the liability of a sick child? I should have left you on the dock." "Then why didn't you?" Clara challenged, standing up to meet his gaze. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Jonah's jaw worked. He looked away, toward the window, toward the endless blue. "Because," he said softly, "no child should burn." The vulnerability in his voice struck Clara like a physical blow. Before she could respond, a shout from the deck above shattered the moment. "Sail ho! Bluecoats, starboard quarter!" Jonah's demeanor shifted instantly. The man in the cabin vanished. The captain returned. He grabbed his spyglass and sword. "Stay here," he ordered. "Get down. Stay away from the windows." He rushed out. Clara grabbed Owen, pulling him off the bed and onto the floor behind the heavy oak desk. "What's happening?" Owen asked, his voice trembling. "It's okay," Clara lied. "Just a storm." It wasn't a storm. It was thunder made by men. The Black Widow lurched violently as a cannonball struck the water nearby. The sound was deafening. Clara covered Owen's ears, curling her body around his. Above them, she heard the chaotic symphony of battle, shouts, the creak of rigging, the roar of Jonah's voice commanding his men. Boom! Wood splintered somewhere close. The ship heeled sharply to port. Clara slid across the floor, hitting her shoulder against the wall. Suddenly, the cabin door flew open. Jonah stood there, wind-blown and fierce. "We have to move," he yelled over the din. "They're raking the stern." "The cabin isn't safe." He rushed in, grabbing Owen up in one arm and seizing Clara's hand with the other. He dragged them out onto the quarterdeck. The world was chaos. Smoke drifted across the deck. A British naval cutter was pursuing them, its white sails billowing, cannons smoking. "Get them to the hold," Jonah shouted to Jem, who was wrestling with the wheel. "Captain, incoming!" Jem screamed. Jonah didn't look. He reacted. He spun around, throwing Clara and Owen against the bulkhead and flinging his own body over them, covering them with his heavy coat. A cannonball smashed into the railing 10 feet away, sending a shower of deadly splinters flying through the air. Clara felt the impact shudder through Jonah's body. He grunted, a sharp, pained sound, but he didn't let go. He held them pinned to the wood, a human shield against the iron death. For a moment, all Clara could smell was gunpowder, salt, and the scent of him, leather and man. She felt the rapid beat of his heart against her back. The debris settled. Jonah pulled back, checking them instantly. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, scanning Clara's face, then Owen's. His eyes were wild, frantic. "No," Clara gasped. "You're bleeding." A splinter the size of a dagger had grazed his cheek, blood flowing freely into his collar. "It's nothing," Jonah said, pulling them up. He shoved them toward the hatch, where Jem was waiting. "Go, get below." Clara hesitated at the hatch, looking back. Jonah had already turned away, drawing his sword, roaring orders to his gunners to return fire. He stood tall against the smoke, a figure of defiance and terrifying strength. He wasn't just a pirate. He was a wall between them and the world. As Jem pulled her down into the darkness of the hold, Clara touched her own chest, her heart racing. She was trapped, yes, but for the first time since the tavern, she realized she wasn't alone. The demon captain had bled for them, and as the Black Widow returned fire, shaking the sea with its fury, Clara knew their lives were now irrevocably bound to his. The adrenaline of the naval chase faded into the rhythmic, creaking labor of a ship at sea, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the cannon fire. The Black Widow had outrun the cutter, slipping into a bank of fog that rolled off the open ocean, but the escape had not been without cost. Back in the captain's cabin, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and old stress. Jonah stood by the stern windows, staring out into the gray mist, his back rigid. He had discarded his heavy coat. It lay in a heap on the floor, the leather slashed and ruined from the shrapnel that had nearly taken his life. Clara sat on the edge of the large bunk, her hands resting on Owen's sleeping form. The boy's breathing was steady, the terror of the attack having exhausted him into a deep slumber. She looked at Jonah's back, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand gripped the window frame until his knuckles were white. She stood up quietly and walked over to the discarded coat. She picked it up, running her fingers over the jagged tear in the heavy leather. "Leave it," Jonah said, not turning around. "It's ruined." "It's not," Clara replied softly. "The leather held. It just needs stitching." Jonah turned then. The cut on his cheek had stopped bleeding, a dark red line against his pale skin. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite place, wariness perhaps, or confusion. "You are a tavern girl," he said, his voice rough, "not a seamstress." "I've mended worse than this," she said, meeting his gaze. And I'm not just a tavern girl. My father was a sailmaker before the fever took him. I know how to use a needle." She sat on the settee, pulling a small sewing kit from the drawer she had raided days ago. She began to work, the thick needle piercing the tough leather with practiced ease. Jonah watched her for a long moment, the silence between them shifting from awkward to something almost companionable. "Why?" he asked finally. Clara didn't look up. "Because you used it to shield my brother. Because you bled on it for us." She pulled the thread tight. "Consider it payment for the room and board." Jonah grunted, turning back to the window, but the tension in his shoulders dropped an inch. 2 days later, the air below decks became stifling. Jem Calloway knocked on the cabin door, stepping in with a tray of hardtack and dried beef. "Captain's at the helm," Jem said, noting Clara's pale complexion. "He says you're to come up for air. Both of you. Can't have the lad breathing stale dust forever." Clara felt a surge of relief. She helped Owen up, wrapping him in a blanket despite the heat, and followed Jem up the stairs. The sunlight was blinding. The ocean stretched out in every direction, a vast, indifferent blue. The crew was busy scrubbing the deck and mending rigging. As Clara emerged, conversation died. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some leering, some superstitious, all hard. She pulled Owen closer to her hip. "Ignore them," Jem muttered, guiding her to the quarterdeck, away from the main cluster of sailors. "They're a lot of superstitious dogs. They think a woman on board brings bad winds." "And the captain?" Clara asked, glancing up at the helm where Jonah stood, his hands steady on the wheel, eyes scanning the horizon. "Does he believe that?" "Jonah Blackwell believes in wind, tide, and gunpowder," Jem said with a dry chuckle. "He hasn't got time for ghosts." Clara watched Jonah. He seemed in his element here, a king in a kingdom of wood and canvas. "He saved us," she said quietly. "He didn't have to." Jem leaned against the railing, his expression sobering. "No, he didn't. But the captain has a soft spot for broken things, and he hates the Navy more than he loves gold." "Why?" Jem hesitated, glancing at his captain. "That's not my story to tell, lass. But know this, there's a reason he's called the demon, and it's not because he was born one. Pain makes monsters of us all, if we let it." He lowered his voice. "Just keep the boy close. We're in open waters, but Captain St. Clair has been spotted in these latitudes, and St. Clair doesn't have Jonah's restraint." The Black Widow made landfall at a place Jem called Dead Man's Cay. It wasn't a port, but a hidden cove shielded by towering limestone cliffs and dense jungle. The water was a crystalline turquoise that seemed to glow from within. "We need fresh water and timber for the main mast," Jonah announced as the anchor dropped. He turned to Clara. "The boy needs solid ground. You're coming ashore." It wasn't a request. They took a skiff to the white sandy beach, while the crew set to work further down the shore, felling trees and filling barrels. Jonah led Clara and Owen to a secluded stretch of sand shaded by palms. Owen was ecstatic. He kicked off his boots and ran into the shallow surf, laughing as the water rushed over his feet. It was the first time Clara had seen him smile in months. She sat on a piece of driftwood, watching him. Jonah stood a few paces away, scanning the tree line, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his cutlass. "He looks better," Jonah said. "The sea air," Clara agreed. "And the medicine, thank you." Jonah shrugged. He took off his coat, the one she had mended, and laid it on the sand. "Sit. You look like you're ready to collapse." Clara sat on the coat, feeling the warmth of the leather. "You're always watching," she observed. "Even here." "Here is where you die if you stop watching," Jonah replied. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "You were terrified in the tavern. You froze." "I didn't freeze," Clara defended. "I grabbed a ladle." "A ladle?" Jonah scoffed, though there was no malice in it. "Against a cutlass. You were lucky Scraggs didn't gut you." He drew a dagger from his belt, a wicked curved thing with a bone handle. He flipped it in his hand, catching it by the blade, and extended the hilt to her. "Take it." Clara stared at the weapon. "I don't like knives." "The world doesn't care what you like, Clara. It cares what you can do." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Stand up." She stood. He pressed the hilt into her hand. His fingers were rough, warm, and calloused. "Don't hold it like a spoon," he corrected, moving her fingers. He stepped behind her, his chest brushing her back, his arm guiding hers. "Grip it like it's part of your hand. If you strike to kill. Hesitation is death." Clara's heart hammered, not from fear, but from the sudden, overwhelming proximity of him. She could smell the soap he used, the salt on his skin. His breath was near her ear. "Like this?" she whispered, thrusting the blade forward. "Better," he murmured. "But keep your balance, center of gravity, low." He placed a hand on her waist to adjust her stance. The touch sent a jolt through her. She turned her head, finding his face inches from hers. His eyes dropped to her lips, then snapped back to her eyes. For a second, the lesson vanished, replaced by a raw, magnetic pull that terrified her more than the blade. Jonah stepped back abruptly, clearing his throat. "Keep practicing. I need to check the perimeter." Now this, the peace of the cove was shattered an hour later. Clara was watching Owen build a sandcastle when a crack of a twig snapped her head around. Jonah was 50 yards down the beach, investigating a trail. 3 men emerged from the jungle line near him. They weren't his crew. They wore mismatched armor and carried muskets. Bounty hunters. "Blackwell," one shouted, raising his rifle. "Get down!" Jonah roared, diving as the musket fired. Sand exploded where he had been standing. Clara grabbed Owen, pulling him behind the large driftwood log. She clutched the dagger Jonah had given her, her hands shaking. Jonah didn't run. He closed the distance with terrifying speed. He deflected a second shot with a roll, coming up with his sword drawn. The fight was brutal and short. Jonah moved like water, fluid and deadly. He disarmed the first man, kicked the second into the surf, and engaged the third in a flurry of steel. But the second man, the one in the surf, pulled a hidden pistol. "Jonah!" Clara screamed. Jonah spun, but not fast enough. The pistol cracked. Jonah jerked violently, clutching his side, but the momentum carried his sword forward, silencing the gunman. Silence returned to the beach, broken only by the lapping waves and Owen's frightened whimpers. Jonah stood amidst the bodies, breathing hard. He looked toward Clara, checking her safety first. Then he swayed. Clara ran to him. Blood was seeping through his white shirt, blooming like a dark red flower, just above his hip. "I'm fine," he gritted out, holstering his sword. "Just a graze." "You're bleeding through your shirt," Clara snapped, panic making her voice sharp. "We need to get back to the ship." "Oh, shh." The journey back was tense. Jem helped Jonah aboard, his face grim. They bypassed the crew and went straight to the cabin. "Get the surgeon," Jem ordered a cabin boy. "No," Jonah growled, collapsing onto the settee. "That drunkard will saw me in half. Leave it." "You can't leave it," Clara said, pushing past Jen. She went to the basin, pouring water and grabbing the bottle of rum from the desk. "Jem, hold him down. I'll do it." Jonah looked up at her through hazy eyes. "You?" "I told you," she said, ripping the hem of her petticoat to make bandages. "I know how to use a needle." She cut away his shirt. The wound was a nasty gash, deep enough to need stitches, but thankfully having missed the vitals. The bullet had passed through the flesh. Clara poured rum over the wound. Jonah hissed, his back arching off the leather, his hand gripping the edge of the settee until the wood groaned. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "I have to stitch it." "Do it," Jonah gasped. "Just get it done." She worked quickly. Every time the needle pierced his skin, she felt a phantom pain in her own. He didn't cry out, but she could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the way his jaw muscles bunched. It was an intimate, bloody dance. She was hurting him to heal him. She wiped the blood from his skin, her fingers lingering for a second on the jagged white scar of an old burn near his ribs. There, she said finally, tying off the thread. It's done. Jonah slumped back, exhausted. He looked at her, his eyes clearing. You have steady hands, Clara Westbrook. And you have too many scars, Jonah Blackwell, she replied softly. It was the first time she had used his first name. That night, the fever took him. It wasn't high, but enough to make him toss and turn on the floor where he insisted on sleeping. Clara, who had taken the bed with Owen, couldn't sleep. She listened to his breathing. Suddenly, Jonah gasped. No, Sarah! He thrashed, kicking the table leg. Lily, run! The smoke! Clara was out of bed in an instant. She knelt beside him. He was trapped in a nightmare, his face twisted in agony. Jonah, she whispered, shaking his shoulder. Wake up, you're safe. He woke with a start, grabbing her wrist. His grip was bruising. His eyes were wide, seeing fire that wasn't there. They're burning it, he rasped. The door is jammed. I can't get in. Jonah, look at me, Clara said firmly, not pulling away. You're on the Black Widow. You're at sea. There is no fire. He blinked, the reality of the cabin slowly filtering in. He looked at her hand in his, then released it as if he had been burned. He sat up, pushing his hair back, his breathing ragged. I'm sorry, he muttered. I didn't hurt you? No, Clara said. She sat back on her heels. Who are Sarah and Lily? Jonah went still. The silence stretched for a long time. He reached for the water bottle, taking a long drink. My wife, he said, his voice void of emotion, which was worse than if he had wept. And my daughter. She was 5. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. I was a merchant captain then, Jonah continued, staring at the floorboards. Honest trade, but I refused to pay a bribe to a naval commodore. Petty corruption. I thought I was being a man of principle. He let out a bitter, hollow laugh. I went on a run to Havana. While I was gone, the Commodore declared my home a den of smugglers. They barricaded the doors. They set it alight. Oh, God, Clara whispered. I came back to ashes, Jonah said. I found a doll in the rubble. It was all that was left. He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. That is why I kill them, Clara. That is why I am the demon. Because the man I was died in that fire with them. Clara didn't know what to do. Words felt useless, so she did the only thing she could. She reached out and placed her hand on his cheek, over the rough stubble and the scar. You're not a demon, she said fiercely. A demon wouldn't have saved Owen. A demon wouldn't have saved me. Jonah leaned into her touch for the briefest second, closing his eyes. It was a surrender, a crack in the fortress. Go to sleep, Clara, he whispered, before I forget that I am dangerous. The next morning, the dynamic in the cabin had shifted irrevocably. There was a quiet understanding between them. Owen, sensing the change, began to follow Jonah around the cabin like a shadow. Captain, Owen asked, holding up a small wooden block he was playing with. Aye, lad? Jonah answered, not looking up from his charts, but his tone was patient. When we get to the next port, can I have a sword? Like yours? Jonah paused. He looked at the boy, then at Clara, who was folding blankets. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. A wooden one, perhaps? We'll see. Clara smiled. It was a domestic scene, bizarrely out of place on a pirate ship, but it felt right. But the peace was fragile. Later that afternoon, Jem burst into the cabin without knocking. His face was pale. Captain, we have a problem. Jonah stood up immediately. What is it? Jem threw a small object onto the desk. It was a silver coin, but it had been marked with a distinct scratching. A skull with a crown. Found this in the supply barrel we brought up from the hold, Jem said, and the lookout spotted a sail on the horizon. Black sails, red trim. Jonah's face hardened into stone. St. Clair. He's tracking us, Jonah, Jem said urgently. He shouldn't know this route. We doubled back twice. Jonah picked up the coin. He knows because someone is telling him. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. A traitor? Jonah looked at her, then at Owen. The softness of the morning was gone. replaced by the cold calculation of the survivor. "Someone on this ship is leaving a trail," Jonah said, his voice low and dangerous. "And until I find them, no one is safe. Lock the door, Clara, and load the pistol I gave you." He grabbed his sword belt and strode out, leaving Clara standing in the sudden chill of the cabin, the marked coin glinting on the desk like an evil eye. The sanctuary was breached. The hunt was on. The Black Widow became a ghost ship as night fell. Lanterns were extinguished, voices hushed to whispers, and the only sound was the slap of water against the hull. Jonah had ordered a course change into the Devil's Throat, a treacherous cluster of jagged rocks and unpredictable currents, hoping to shake St. Clair's pursuit. Inside the cabin, the darkness was absolute. Clara sat on the floor with her back against the bed frame, the loaded pistol heavy in her lap. Owen was asleep on the mattress, blissfully unaware of the tension that vibrated through the ship's timbers. Jonah had not returned for hours. He was on deck, prowling, hunting for the traitor. Every creak of the ship made Clara flinch, her fingers tightening on the grip of the weapon. She remembered his lesson. Hesitation is death. The door handle turned slowly. Clara raised the pistol, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Clara," a low voice whispered, "it's me." She lowered the gun as Jonah slipped inside, locking the deadbolt behind him. He smelled of salt spray and cold fury. In the dim moonlight filtering through the stern windows, his face was a mask of exhaustion. "Did you find him?" she whispered. "No," Jonah replied, pacing the small space. "The men are on edge. Accusations are flying. If I push too hard, I risk a mutiny. If I don't, St. Clair finds us." He stopped pacing and looked at her. He knelt, bringing his face level with hers. "If they board us—" "I know," Clara interrupted, her voice steady despite the fear. "I shoot to kill." Jonah reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed her skin, a touch so tender it made her breath catch. "You are brave, Clara, braver than I deserve." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers for a fleeting second. It was a promise and a prayer. Then he stood up, the moment broken by the harsh reality of their survival. "Stay down, stay quiet," he ordered, and turned back to the door. The explosion didn't come from the sea. It came from below. A deafening crack shuddered through the ship, throwing Clara sideways. The floor tilted violently. Owen woke with a scream. "Get up," Clara shouted, grabbing him. "Under the desk, now!" Outside, the night erupted into chaos. Shouts of fire and sabotage mingled with the frantic ringing of the ship's bell. The cabin door shuddered under a heavy blow. "Open up, girlie," a voice roared. Clara froze. It wasn't Jonah. It was Scraggs. She scrambled back, positioning herself between Owen and the door, leveling the pistol. The wood splintered as an axe smashed through the lock. The door swung open, revealing Scraggs. He was grinning, a torch in one hand and a boarding axe in the other. Behind him, through the smoke, she could see the deck was a battlefield. "Captain's busy," Scraggs sneered, stepping into the sanctuary. "Rudder chains blown. We're drifting ducks. Get back," Clara warned, her hands shaking. "You think you can use that?" Scraggs laughed, stepping closer. Clara didn't think. She pulled the trigger. The pistol roared, kicking back into her palm. The shot went wide, burying itself in the doorframe. But the flash blinded Scraggs for a second. He roared in anger, dropping the torch. The rug caught fire instantly. "You little witch!" Scraggs lunged. Clara threw the empty pistol at his face and drew the dagger. She moved as Jonah had taught her. Low, fast. As Scraggs reached for her, she slashed at his arm, drawing a line of blood. But Scraggs was massive, and he was fueled by adrenaline. He backhanded her, a crushing blow that sent her spinning into the desk. The dagger clattered from her grip. "Clara!" Owen screamed, crawling out from his hiding spot. "No, Owen, run!" Clara gasped, trying to rise, but the room was spinning. Scraggs ignored her. He grabbed Owen by the back of his nightshirt, lifting the boy effortlessly. "St. Clair wants the captain to suffer. Taking his pet stray ought to do it. No, Clara screamed, launching herself at Scragg's legs. She clawed, bit, and kicked, desperate to free her brother. Scraggs kicked her away, hard. She slammed into the wall, the breath leaving her lungs in a painful wheeze. Through the haze of pain, she saw Scraggs carrying a kicking, screaming Owen toward the shattered stern windows. "Let him go!" she rasped, dragging herself across the floor. A grapple hook smashed through the window, catching on the sill. Ropes were being thrown. Claire's ship, the Viper, was alongside. "Jonah!" Clara screamed with everything she had left. "Jonah!" On the quarterdeck, Jonah heard the scream over the clash of steel. It cut through him like a blade. He decapitated the man he was fighting and turned, seeing the smoke billowing from his cabin. "Jem, the helm!" Jonah roared, abandoning the command. He sprinted toward the stern, cutting down two boarders who tried to intercept him. He burst into the cabin just as Scraggs was stepping onto the window ledge, Owen tucked under his arm like a parcel. "Scraggs!" Jonah bellowed, a sound of pure animalistic rage. Scraggs turned, grinning. "Payments due, Captain." He jumped. Jonah dove across the room, ignoring the fire spreading on the rug, ignoring Clara's prone form. He reached the window just as Scraggs landed on the deck of the Viper, which was already peeling away, its cannons firing a parting volley into the Black Widow's rigging. Jonah scrambled onto the sill, ready to leap across the widening gap of black water. "Jonah, no!" Jem's voice was behind him. Strong arms wrapped around his waist, hauling him back. "Let me go!" Jonah thrashed, watching the Viper disappear into the fog. He could see Owen's small face looking back, terrified. Before he was dragged out of sight, "I have to get him." "You'll drown, man! She's too far!" Jem shouted, wrestling Jonah back into the cabin. The Black Widow groaned, listing heavily. The rudder was gone. They were crippled. Jonah slammed his fist into the window frame, shattering the remaining glass. He roared into the night, a sound of utter devastation. He turned back to the room. Clara was pushing herself up, her face bruised, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I tried," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I tried to stop him. I shot. I missed." Jonah stared at her, his chest heaving. The firelight cast dancing shadows on his face, making him look truly demonic. But as he looked at Clara, broken, bleeding, and blaming herself, the rage fractured into grief. He crossed the room in 2 strides and fell to his knees before her. He didn't speak. He just pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. Clara clung to him, her fingers digging into his back. "We have to get him back," she whispered fiercely into his ear. "Promise me, Jonah. Promise me we get him back." Jonah pulled back, framing her face with his bloodied hands. His eyes were dark, burning with a cold, terrifying resolve. "I will burn the ocean to ash," he vowed, his voice deadly quiet. "I will kill them all, and I will bring him home." The morning sun rose on a broken ship. The Black Widow limped along, her mainmast splintered, her rudder jury-rigged by the carpenters. The crew moved in silence, the usual banter replaced by a grim determination. They knew what had happened. They knew the captain's pup had been taken. Jonah stood at the helm, not moving, not sleeping. He had been there all night. Clara emerged from below. She had washed the blood from her face, though the bruise on her cheek was darkening to a violent purple. She wore trousers and a shirt she had borrowed from the ship's stores, her hair tied back severely. She no longer looked like a tavern girl. She looked like a woman going to war. She walked up the steps to the quarterdeck. Jem and the other officers stepped aside. She stood beside Jonah. He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the northern horizon where the Viper had vanished. "The rudder is holding," she said quietly. "Barely," Jonah replied. "Do we know where he's taking him?" "St. Clair has a fortress," Jonah said. "Isla de Sangre. It's a rock in the middle of a reef maze. Impossible to approach by sea without being blown out of the water." "Impossible for a ship," Clara said, "but not for a few men in a boat." Jonah finally looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine. She wasn't asking for comfort. She was offering a strategy. "It's a suicide mission, Clara." "He is my brother," she said, "and he matters to you." Jonah looked away, his jaw tightening. "He's the only innocent thing I've ever known." "Then we go," Clara said. "We fix the ship, we sail to the island, and we take him back." Jonah looked at his crew. They were battered, tired, and outnumbered. But as they looked up at him, he didn't see defeat. He saw anger. Scraggs had betrayed them all. St. Clair had attacked their home. Jonah drew his sword, the metal singing in the morning air. "Mr. Calloway," he barked. "Aye, Captain." Jem responded instantly. "Set a course for Isla de Sangre. Break out the extra powder. Sharpen every blade on this ship." A roar of approval went up from the deck. Jonah turned back to Clara. He sheathed his sword and took her hand, squeezing it tight. "Get ready," he said. "We are going into hell." "I know," Clara replied, squeezing back, "but the devil is on our side." The cliffs of Isla de Sangre rose from the churning black water like the teeth of a dead god. The fortress perched atop the jagged rock was a shadow against the stars, silent and imposing. Below, in a small skiff bobbing in the violent surf near the sea caves, Jonah tightened the straps of his weapons belt. He looked at Clara. She was dressed in dark canvas trousers and a shirt dyed black with soot, her hair braided tight against her scalp. She looked nothing like the tavern girl he had stolen, nor the trembling captive he had sheltered. She looked like a blade honed by the sea. "Stay close to the wall," Jonah whispered, the roar of the waves masking his voice to anyone but her. "The rocks are slick. One slip, and the current takes you under." "I won't slip," Clara said, her eyes fixed on the dark maw of the cave entrance above them. "And I won't stop until we find him." Jonah nodded to Jem, who manned the oars. "Give the signal." Jem lit a hooded lantern, flashing it 3 times toward the open sea. Moments later, a boom echoed across the water. The Black Widow, positioned miles off the main harbor, had opened fire on the fortress gates. It was a distraction, a loud, fiery suicide run to draw St. Clair's eyes away from the cliffs. "Go," Jonah commanded. They climbed. The rock was wet and sharp, tearing at their hands. Jonah moved with the grace of a predator, finding holds where there seemed to be none, but he constantly paused, reaching back to haul Clara up the steepest sections. He could feel the tremors in her hands, not from fear, but from a desperate, consuming adrenaline. They breached the cellar grate 20 minutes later, pulling themselves onto the cold stone floor of the fortress dungeon. It smelled of mold and old iron. "This way," Jonah murmured, drawing his cutlass. "The great hall is 3 levels up. That's where he'll be." Claire likes an audience. They moved like ghosts through the corridors, silencing 2 guards before they could raise an alarm. Every step closer to the top tightened the knot in Clara's chest. "Owen, please be alive." They reached the heavy oak doors of the great hall. Jonah paused, his hand hovering over the latch. He looked at Clara, his eyes fierce and unguarded. "Whatever happens in there," he whispered, "get the boy. Do not wait for me. Do not look back. We leave together." Clara hissed, gripping her dagger. "All of us." Jonah didn't argue. He kicked the doors open. The hall was bathed in torchlight. At the far end, seated on a high chair like a mock throne, sat Captain Elias St. Clair. He was a gaunt man with a face like a skull sipping wine from a silver goblet. And there, suspended in a rusted iron birdcage hanging over a gaping hole in the floor, a refuse chute that dropped straight to the jagged rocks and sea below, was Owen. "Owen!" Clara screamed. "Clara!" The boy's voice was thin, terrified. He gripped the bars of the cage, his small face pale. "Right on time," St. Clair drawled, standing up. "I must say, Blackwell, your diversion with the ship was loud, but predictable." Jonah stepped into the room, Clara at his flank. "Let him down, Elias. This is between us." "Is it?" St. Clair smiled cruelly. He gestured to the winch mechanism near the wall. Scraggs stood there, one hand on the release lever, a bandage wrapped around the arm Clara had slashed days ago. He grinned at her, a look of pure malice. "You took my eye," St. Clair said, touching the patch on his face. "You took my prize ship 3 years ago, and now I take your heart again." He nodded to Scraggs. "Drop the brat." "No!" Jonah roared, charging forward. "Get the boy!" Jonah shouted to Clara as he intercepted St. Clair. The two captains collided in a spark of steel. Clair was fast, his rapier darting like a snake, but Jonah fought with the heavy, brutal power of a broadsword. They traded blows, the clang of metal echoing off the stone walls. Clara didn't watch. She sprinted toward Scraggs. The brute laughed, taking his hand off the lever to draw his cutlass. "Come here, little mouse. I owe you a beating." He swung the heavy blade. Clara didn't try to block it. She would have been crushed. Instead, she remembered the beach. Center of gravity low. Hesitation is death. She slid on her knees across the stone floor, ducking under the whistling arc of his blade. As she passed him, she drove her dagger upward with both hands, burying it into the soft flesh under his arm, aiming for the heart. Scraggs gasped, his eyes going wide. The cutlass clattered to the floor. He staggered back, clutching his chest, and collapsed. Clara scrambled to her feet and threw herself at the winch. The cage had slipped a foot when Scraggs let go. It was swaying precariously over the abyss. She grabbed the handle, straining with every ounce of her strength to lock the gears. "I've got you, Owen, I've got you," she cried, locking the brake mechanism. Across the room, Jonah heard the gear lock. He saw Clara safe. He saw the boy safe. The fear that had been shackling him, making him fight defensively, evaporated. All that remained was the demon. St. Clair lunged, aiming for Jonah's throat. Jonah didn't parry. He stepped into the guard, taking the blade through the meat of his left shoulder. He grunted but didn't stop. He trapped St. Clair's sword arm with his injured side and drove his own hilt into St. Clair's face, shattering his nose. St. Clair stumbled back, stunned. Jonah didn't give him a second breath. He kicked the man in the chest, sending him flying backward, straight through the open refuse chute. St. Clair's scream faded into the roar of the ocean below. Jonah stood panting, blood streaming from his shoulder, his chest heaving. The hall fell silent, save for the crackle of torches and Owen sobbing. "Jonah!" Clara ran to him, but he waved her off. "The cage!" he rasped. "Get him out!" Together, they hauled the winch, pulling the cage back onto the solid floor. Clara tore the door open and pulled Owen into her arms, weeping. Jonah knelt beside them, wrapping his good arm around both of them, his forehead resting against Clara's shoulder. "It's over," he whispered. "It's done." The escape was a blur. The Black Widow's bombardment had started a fire in the lower levels, and smoke was filling the fortress. They descended the cliffs with Owen strapped to Jonah's back, the pain in his shoulder ignored through sheer force of will. When they reached the skiff, Jem was waiting, his face pale with relief. They rowed away as the fortress of Isla de Sangre burned like a funeral pyre against the night sky. Back on the ship, the crew cheered as they climbed aboard. But Jonah silenced them with a raised hand. He was swaying on his feet. "Set a course," he ordered, his voice weak. "Anywhere but here." Then he collapsed. He woke to the smell of lavender and salt. Sunlight streamed through the mended curtains of the captain's cabin. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his shoulder stopped him. He looked down to see fresh bandages, expertly stitched. "Lie still," a soft voice commanded. Clara was sitting in the chair beside the bed. Owen was asleep on the settee, clutching a wooden sword. Jonah looked at her. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear, filled with a warmth that terrified him more than any blade. "You saved us," she said. "You saved yourself," Jonah rasped. "You gutted Scraggs. I had a good teacher." She stood and poured him a cup of water, bringing it to his lips. He drank greedily. "Clara," he said, when she pulled the cup away. "Don't," she said, placing a finger on his lips. "You don't have to say anything." "I do," he insisted. He took her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "I have spent 10 years looking for a way to die. I thought my penance was to burn." He looked at Owen, then back to her. "But when I saw you in that cage, when I saw you fighting, I realized I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. For you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She leaned down, her forehead resting against his. "Then live, Jonah. The past is ash. We are here." "I'm not a good man," he whispered. "No," she smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You are a pirate and a fool, but you are mine." Jonah pulled her down, kissing her. It wasn't a kiss of hunger or desperation, but of relief. It tasted of life. It tasted of a future he hadn't believed in. Epilogue. 6 months later. The cove was not on any map. The water was a brilliant turquoise, lapping gently against a white sand beach. A small cottage stood near the tree line, built from the timber of wrecked ships, but sturdy and warm. Jonah sat on the porch, whittling a piece of driftwood. The scar on his shoulder still ached when the rain came, but the phantom pains of the fire were gone. Down by the water, a woman laughed. Clara was chasing a healthy tanned boy into the surf. Owen shrieked with joy, splashing her, his lungs clear and strong. Jonah watched them. He put down the wood and the knife. He stood up, walking down the sand to join them. He wasn't Captain Blackwell here. He wasn't the demon. He was just a man who had walked through hell and found the other side. Clara saw him coming and stopped, smiling, her hand extended. He took it, pulling her close as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in gold. Together, they watched the sun set on the past.